Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next in RIA's award-winning Unlocking Innovation events on developing whole systems in the digital age. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Carl King, and I'm one of the technical and innovation managers here at RIA. Could I ask that everyone make sure that their cameras and microphones are switched off as I welcome Diane Crowther, who's the CEO from HS1, who will be opening the event today. Diane has over 30 years of experience in the railway industry. Prior to being the CEO of HS1, she was the Chief Operating Officer at Govia Thameslink and has held several director roles within Network Rail, including the Route Managing Director of the West Coast Main Line. She has a Master's in Transport and Logistics from Salford University and is a member of the Chartered Institute of Marketing and Fellow of the Institute of Leadership and Management. She's also a qualified executive coach, and I think we can all agree that we're very lucky to have her here today and appreciate her taking a time out of what I'm sure is a very busy schedule to open and join us on the event today. So, Diane, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Carl. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today and launch 5 days of events that will focus on the importance of systems engineering and viewing the railway as a complex system of systems. As Carla sort of said, my name's Diane Crowther and I am the CEO of HS1, the UK's only high-speed railway, but not for much longer. I've worked in the rail sector, as Carla sort of said, for over 30 years and can honestly say that I have witnessed some great innovation where there's been real clarity and purpose for outcomes. And I've also witnessed some pet projects too, and I'm sure we can all name a few ourselves. And pet projects where there's been a passion to buy a gadget or a shiny new thing, a new thing that potentially causes imbalance to the system, doesn't solve a problem and gets abandoned after a few months. I'm sure we've all got our own examples, good and bad. The rail sector is an industry that innovates, and over the years, significant technological innovation has made train travel one of the safest, quickest, efficient and greenest modes of transport. That's good. However, over time, our system has become more complex. There are more interfaces, more passengers, more trains, and a plethora of legacy kit that needs to work with the new stuff. That can mean that sometimes innovation is stifled or suboptimal. Opportunities to deliver are missed, and our system becomes less efficient and not integrated. To make things even more challenging, the pandemic has affected our sector in a way that nobody pre-COVID could ever have envisaged. Passenger volumes have dropped to 20% of what they were, and we are now faced with the challenge of how to get passengers back and work out what structural consumer change the pandemic has brought about. It is clear our traditional passenger model will change. The role of government has also changed in the last 12 months, as has the balance of risk and reward. What impact will this have on a sector that is already perceived by many as slow to innovate and implement change? It may help. I believe there is an opportunity for us all collectively to satisfy a clear narrative from government and rise to the challenge of quicker, cheaper, better, greener. How will we do that? An important and essential first step is recognising and acknowledging that we operate within a system. I'm an operator at heart, and I make no apology for that, and over the years have been the beneficiary of incomplete concepts and schemes, decisions where functions and organisations and individuals have made changes in isolation. That means Diane at times has been a bit confused and a very confused operator, and not particularly wedded to any change that I was being compelled to make or indeed adopt. These days I'm a bit older and wiser and ready for companies bearing gifts and enthusiastic sponsors bringing schemes. At HS1 we talk about the system a lot. We talk about who uses the system and we talk about the problem we have in the system. When we talk to suppliers, we talk about our strategic intent and describe our problem statement. Can the market help us achieve our goals and or fix particular issues? And we always include the end user in the definition of our system. Our strategic intent is to grow traffic on our railway. If I run more trains, I make more money for my shareholders. And that's good, as it keeps them happy. But high-speed rail is expensive. A big barrier to growth is our high cost base. And HS1 is regularly quoted as being more expensive on track access charges than other high-speed infrastructure managers. New technology and innovation can help reduce costs, and we need to ensure we are doing this in a responsible and sustainable manner. We have had to change the way we think about the application of new technologies and techniques, placing a real focus on the outcome to drive technology choices as opposed to getting excited about a technology and then thinking about how we could use it. Remember, a confused Diane isn't good. This has been achieved through using a structured approval process to challenge the reason for change and measuring the business impact. The outcomes we look for are straightforward and will be recognised, I am sure, by all of you. Improved safety, whole life cost reduction, sustainability and customer experience are our drivers. We're applying this process to the whole HS1 system, and earlier this year we developed a project funded by Innovate UK and in partnership with Pooley Group Limited, Network Rail High Speed, Afranet UK Limited and the University of Sheffield Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. We brought together sensor technology, augmented reality, a private 5G network, AI, and importantly, operator maintainer input to unlock the potential industry benefits. Sensors have been placed on several key bits of our system, including lifts and escalators in our stations and on point systems on our rail infrastructure. They will provide critical operational data, which will help monitor the performance of the assets. Not only we will be able to assess any faults remotely, meaning we can avoid sending out maintenance crews for initial inspections. We are able to dispatch repair teams far more quickly than ever before. This will not only save time and money, but will ultimately improve delays to services due to infrastructure issues and improve safety for our repair teams. This will revolutionise the way we monitor the performance of our line and stations. Building augmented reality technology that will virtually replicate rail assets and allow the swift detection and repair of faults, such as St Pancras Station's lifts, escalators and travellators, as well as signalling equipment along the line. The application of the technology is all important through, and linking our rail assets and station assets on one platform will start to bring the management of the whole HS1 system together. And this is the real game changer. The consistent flow of data and information between on-site and remote maintenance teams will enable both parties to make more informed decisions. Augmented reality is often pitched as a training aid, but it can be so much more. It needs to be used as an operational aid for real-time decision-making, bringing together multiple information sources to assist our control and maintenance staff. This can only be done by bringing the frontline teams in early in the development cycle and interpreting their requirement to deliver a system that is more user-friendly than their legacy approach. Many technologies have failed when it's easier for the technician or the operator to use paper drawings, data sets, standards and experience to make decisions rather than use the new tech. Usability is essential. If this type of technology is adopted by the wider rail industry, the benefits are huge. It will help rebuild networks that have been disrupted by COVID-19 and keep rail workers safe whilst carrying out work socially distanced for the foreseeable future. It will also improve productivity across teams and cut costs at more than 3,000 UK railway stations. We've made a start and have lots of other ideas in the pipeline that will help us to deliver our strategic intent. The industry has a huge task ahead of it to meet the cheaper, better, quicker, greener challenge laid down by government. We need to collaborate, think about the system users and make sure there is a strong business case that supports the objective of the business. Our aim must be to deliver clarity, not confusion within the systems we operate within, thus avoiding any more future confused Dianes. Thank you very much, Carl. I'm going to hand back to you now.
Thank you very much, Diane. And can I just say an apology, first of all, for starting a little bit late, and also for the funny angle that you're viewing me at, and for seeing my light fixtures earlier. But unfortunately, I've had a problem with my laptop overheating, so I've had to switch to my iPad. But hopefully, I'll be able to manage this afternoon. So thank you again, Diane, for that great introduction. And over these next few days, we'll be looking into the importance of systems engineering and systems thinking for these big major projects that we've got coming up within the industry. And we're going to start with pre-feasibility and how we actually identify and specify what problems we're trying to solve. Not what we need to, how we're solving it or what the solutions are, but just identifying the problem. And we'll be covering that in today's session. Tomorrow, we'll be holding a workshop, courtesy, thank you very much, of Adam Rickson from WSP, on requirements and how we should have how it's important to define requirements. Right. Anyone who can attend that tomorrow, please encourage you to do it. It's an excellent session. And then later in the week, we'll be looking at how we can use simulation and modeling tools to support our decision making, and also talk about progressive assurance, and also the new proposals that Network Rail are making for how systems engineering will be embedded in their organisation going forward. So today's session, we have 4 presenters covering how we can identify, define and manage problems that require a system solution. And when all the presenters have finished, we'll be holding a panel session discussion on pre-feasibility and feasibility, and how we get problems defined. If you have any questions while the presenters are presenting, if you could please put them in the chat function, and we'll pick those up in the panel session. But what we'll do is we'll invite you to ask that question again, so you can put your camera on, your microphone on, and actually speak to the presenters the panelists face to face. So let me get started straight away. I'd like to introduce you to Mike Marua from Capgemini Engineering, formerly Altran, until I think it was last week or the week before, wasn't it, Mike?
Not too long ago.
Not too long ago. For those of you who don't know Mike, he was born in California, in San Francisco, and has graduated from the University of California in Berkeley, as well as the US Naval Postgraduate School, and he got his in electrical engineering. And after a highly successful 20-year career in the US Navy as a surface line officer, he became a systems engineer in 2002 at Boeing, working in the aerospace and defence, before moving to the UK in 2007 at the request of your good lady wife, I believe, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and since you've been there, you've worked at Atkins, Fraser Nash, and now Capgemini Engineering as a systems engineer and project manager. And you've worked Mike's worked on organisational and digitisation change projects in rail, defence, nuclear, Her Majesty's government and infrastructure. And Mike's going to talk to us about the importance of system engineering, and let's see how they do systems engineering in other industries, and what we can learn from there, and maybe what rail can learn from them. So, Mike, I'll hand over to you if you want to put your slides up. And thank you very much for being with us today.
All right, thank you. Let's see, does it show up?
Perfect, Mike, thank you.
All right, okay, well, let's get started. So, yes, my name is Mike Marua, and from Capgemini Engineering. We're going to look outside of rail. We are going to bring up an aerospace example. In fact, something that I did while at Boeing, but also to see where some of the common trends are, because I think it's not so much how are other people doing it. What is rail missing? What's out there that's actually happening that we just haven't matured enough, let's say, or maybe we have to take in the new way of thinking and new technologies. But like Carl said, Capgemini, Altran was been bought out, if you will, or included into the Capgemini family. We're now Capgemini Engineering, and so we deal in digital transformation. But there's a lot of companies that do this, and we like to think we do it maybe a little better, but maybe more insightful of other industries. Bruce Elliott is also from Capgemini Engineering, and so is Helen Wright, who joined into the discussions during the panel discussions and bring in their insights. But one thing I want to focus on is that this use of intelligent systems, if there's the biggest change that's come about since I've been around, and I've been around a while, that it's about digitalization, new systems, intelligent systems, both in the home, in cities and buildings, you know, how we design things, smart buildings, and transportation as you grow into more autonomy, and also body care, healthcare, how that has digitalized. Even something as simple as a thermometer. When I was growing up, you had two types of thermometers, one you stuck in your mouth and one you didn't. And you always had to make sure you knew which one was which. Today, it's something else, and it's quite different. So it's a digital thing. But there's also some key technologies. I was listening to for PMI, Project Management Institute, one of the speakers was talking about the next 10 years in technology changes. 5G, Internet of Things, autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, the augmented reality, and blockchain technologies. Those key things, which are coming up now, and we're starting to see different parts in these different areas, will likely change the way we need to think of systems engineering. And not so much that it adds new rules, but probably new tools, new ways to get there quicker, and using model-based approaches and dealing with the digital information technology in a more structured way than perhaps we had in the past, to add to commonality and reuse a lot better. So we have to be able to deal with some of those issues that are coming up. I also work in the NCOSE Rail Interest Group, and also in some of the transportation working groups within NCOSE. We deal with some key things that have been coming up. In fact, this year we have, as part of our broader scheme or broader theme, model-based systems engineering, which has come up as something that's quite common to all the transportation fields. And we deal with a lot of the transit agencies in the US, plus that transportation here in the UK. But the use of that has been important. How does one transition to that? And how does an organization that's just getting used to really applying systems engineering do that, and do that more purposefully? We have whole organizations. There's so much change going about. We need to get back to having a whole organization approach. Basic type things, having an organization that understands and can pull together systems engineering, project management, enterprise architects, and asset managers together into a common way of doing things so that they can share data and work commonly through their set of products, services, or whatever it is that they offer. And in doing that, there's always the digitalization of tool sets. We want to share. We want to share things more easily. The paper-based approaches and some of the using disparate tool sets this doesn't work. It adds too much time. It's too wasteful. Virtual environments with COVID has really changed a lot of the ways we deal with that in the workplace. That's become the new way. I can have a team with all sorts of experts from different parts of the world in one place, on the same room, in the same time, virtually, where it's difficult to do that in real life. Again, mention intelligent systems and artificial intelligence. How does that play into this? And how do we engineer for that as those things are changing over time? And above all, of all the things we've talked about since last year, which you'll hear from Derek Price, I think later from Nassar, Majoti, is high-scale, large-scale integration. How do you make it work all together so that the outcome is fitted together, both organizationally, both with the right crew skills and sets, with the right technology, with the right service to the public, all that. How does that work? That's not an easy thing to do, and it's something that needs to do all this. But I mentioned all those things, maybe in the context of what other people do, but actually we do this in rail. We do this and don't realize it, or if we are doing it, we could be doing it better. So let's take a little look in MBSE and what that really means. Most people have looked at the NCOSE definition. It's about model-based approaches, supporting systems engineering, design, analysis, verification, validation, et cetera, et cetera. But it's using a more model-based approach, which is beyond words, beyond text, and putting that into tool sets in which we can use that to help shape the requirement, and perhaps provide a quicker path to managing that through a common database or a common shared models so that everybody can use single source of truth. We've identified that kind of thing. That's what basic model-based system engineering is trying to achieve. So that gets us started down the path of sharing. Now, if we do understand that, how we need to get to that sharing environment, how do we do with different systems engineering approaches and model-based approaches? Although we think one, it needs to be in place of another, they actually can work together. And I've seen some projects where you need to be more traditional because things are still text-based, based on contracts and based on different organizations. They may not have common tools. So my systems engineering way of handling that might be best. My model-based way might be better if I need to do things more architecturally and I'm sharing things on SysML or other tools, and to be able to do that through my V-cycle. Or I might be where I'm doing product lifecycle management, and now I'm doing the whole thing through life, tying it all together through a model that leads to a digital twin. Maybe I need to do some of it like that. Or maybe it's a mix of all three, or starting with a maturity path that gets me to the latter one in some progressive way. And I need to deal with that at the product level, the industrial level, and the operations and maintenance level, and focus on benefits. We can't leave that out. This is the business case. And so benefits needs to be a key thing that drives all this. And for each level that I'm dealing with, if I'm a supplier at product level, I have my own set of benefits. If I'm the company that pulls it all together or the integrator, I'm dealing with those type of issues, and then those who operate. So everybody has benefits, and we need to have a way to pull that together in these complex systems. So that's where the whole organization approach comes in, again, our other theme. And that means I need to get all my organization, all these people working together to actually manage this thing in the center, which represents my capability, the organization, the technology systems, information, and above all, people that tie it all together. So all those need to work together to be able to define what it is I'm starting at, where I want to be, this migration path that takes me forward, and following capability roadmaps and technology roadmaps that kind of give me a short, medium, and long-term vision of how this works. Nobody has a crystal ball. It's hard to see 5 years out how things are going to be. So we need to migrate it and work this together as a common team. And the only way to do that is to integrate these kind of disciplines in this multidisciplinary approach and lay this out as an organization with its suppliers and everybody else. So this takes effort, but if done right, it can make complex systems in the digital environment work a lot better. So what does that mean? Well, we can look at top-down approaches because they address what's needed. I can do it by different segments and de-risk different parts of it with modeling and simulation. I can look at bottoms-up type approaches that allow me to look into fine detail of particular areas of development. But in real life, I need to mix all of these together to get to the right space in between that gives you the right top-down with the right bottom-up approach with the right delivery over time to work this through risk. And most times I have to do this in a way that adds value, but also migrates and could change every time I do an iteration. Every time I upgrade to my railway system or my product, I need to look at how to migrate in the future. So that takes me to my example. Okay, I don't know who were still working in this environment or working, in an engineering environment in 2004, but I was. and I'm sure there are many others that are listening that say, oh yeah, I remember 2004. Well, what happened then, this is Boeing. Boeing working with SAIC, with a large-scale integrator for the U.S. Army to create a future combat system. Now, Boeing, we traditionally think of a aerospace company, but bringing in their system-to-system type thinking and that kind of large-scale approach with SAIC, who's a consultancy, but really focused a lot on architectures and architectural approaches, working together with a huge supply chain of other component suppliers, platform suppliers, to pull all this together and come up with a digitalized, and at the time, a network-centric force. And if you can see in the diagram where you start looking at the information management, it kind of looks like an information model. I'm going from the lower level standards, transport level, service level, up to application level, and that becoming things embedded to the various platforms, the various vehicles, firepower, artillery, maneuver type systems, support systems, robotics, all that was being thought of together as this future fighting force. Great idea, big system-to-system approach. A few things happen around that time, though. If those who remember, there was this Afghanistan, Iraq, that had changed. The enemy wasn't as equally digitalized force. It might have been a lower tech force, but because it's a lower tech force, some of the high tech solutions, could either be defeated or it just changed the type of battle problem you're dealing with. So all these come about and times change. And so this had to change. And what happens actually is both in the British Army and US Army and armies in NATO still went about on the network-centric type way of doing things, thinking of things more digitally. They may have changed the platforms a bit. They might have kept their old platforms and upgraded them and digitalized them, but it had a different evolutionary path. But the idea of going to the network, changing that way, that becoming a common key of the architecture moving forward in military systems, in more open type environment that took in this digital internet, became an idea that sparked off current development, as you might see in defense. And I would say you would also see in other parts of aerospace where systems are monitored, the aircraft themselves, the way they operate and all that are managed throughout their life cycle in ways that we wouldn't even think of even in 2004, because the digital technology wasn't in place. So rail, I think, is also at that verge of becoming digitalized, of open architectures, of finding software solutions that work together, that can grow over time, that don't have to depend on new different products coming in and changing everything. They can be evolved as part of an ongoing generic application type architecture and done in a way that's structured. But it takes work to find that to happen, so it's useful. So just a bit about ourselves as I wrap this up. Capgemini Engineering, Thales, it's the same thing. We're just part of Capgemini, but under Capgemini Engineering. So a lot of what we work in different areas, whether it's life sciences, energy, aeronautics, defense, consumer, I think the experience that's showing in these, and what I'll show on the last slide, is that seems to be a common trend. The digitalization of the product, the way things are manufactured, the way you bring software together and upgrade it in these various, intervals and increments, and the way we think of whole lifecycle management in which you're trying to capture that and manage that in the digital ways that Diane was talking about actually in HS1, that's the new way. And you can't do it piecemeal. It has to be done partly top down and partly bottom up to be able to pull all these things together. And I think in some of the areas that the company's worked at, and Eltran and now Capgemini Engineering is working in the oil industry, the energy area with Baker Hughes, and their digitalization of some of their manufacturing techniques with information, the Internet of Things, and how they transform the way things are produced on the shop floor to Airbus, and using that with print electronics. So instead of using cabling systems, you're using that throughout the aircraft. It's easier to use. It's more modular. It saves weight. Hyperloop. Also with using that with new ground transportation and those type of systems. But it's all based on digitalized change and getting organizations and people to change along with it. Sanofi is in the medical pharmaceutical area, and both Sanofi and Energy, which is Engie doing that for energy, are also going around digital transformation and changing the way they do things with digital operations. So those are the type of things I see that are probably the most things that can come out of this. What I challenge the workshop to do, when you define requirements, think of it as what you need. Think of it in the logical and not be too prescriptive. We need the innovation to break out that prescriptive stuff. And we can define that more so in a physical architecture, but we really need to understand the logic. So that's the thing to maybe to look at. When you're looking at Derek Price's system integration for delivery, that's all about the big scale integration. How do I pull those things out to define what I need at the right time and get everything to work together? It all plays together in this transformation to digitalization. And that's the big thing that we're going to all have to deal with, whether we like it or not. So back to you, Carl.
Thank you very much, Mike. A lot of food for thought there to start the day off. And I'll now pass on straight away, if that's okay, Mike, to Arvinder Sangha, who is a senior systems consultant with Harmonic, supporting clients across various sectors with technical program delivery. And I see also Paul Whitcomb's joined us as well, who's also from Harmonics. Hello, Paul. Arvinder, is a senior systems consultant. He's also a TOGAF certified enterprise architect with over 10 years industry experience in systems engineering, working in defence as well as public and private sectors, and specific real experience with the delivery of midlife system upgrades across an existing fleet of units that are in service. So Arvinder, I'll hand over to you now, please. And if you'd just like to share slides, thank you very much for being with us here today and for joining us and for sharing.
No problem. Thank you, Cole. Much appreciated. And thank you, Mike, for your presentation as well. I think we'll have a common theme in terms of the systems engineering approach. But so today we'll be talking about user stories. Just before I start, though, I'll have a brief introduction to Harmonic and how we're helping clients deliver complex programs. So just over to you, Paul.
Okay. Right, thanks, Al. Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Whitcomb, Head of Rail for Harmonic. I'll only keep you a minute. Harmonic, a delivery partner, not just a consultancy. We help our customers by embedding our teams with our customers. We move quickly and effectively to understand challenges, improve ways of working, and embed our team to deliver joint outcomes. We have developed an effective end-to-end approach called transformation workflow to successfully support our customers on the transformation journey, combining business winning, project, systems engineering, culture and people capabilities successfully deliver outcomes for our customers. By covering all these capabilities, we can understand delivery issues quickly and support the right capabilities and improve performance. I'd like to hand back to Arv now. He will talk you through user stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Just quickly back to the slides. Okay. So yes, on to user stories. So what are user stories? I suppose in terms of a definition, they're basically a first-hand perspective from a system user. And again, system users we use broadly. This is including but not limited to operators, maintainers, anyone who has a use of the system of interest. In terms of where user stories come from, that they traditionally come from a software development approach, an agile software development approach where they're used, but we've got to be clear that the underlying intent of user stories aligns with the systems engineering approach, really understanding the problem in hand and really framing actually what we're trying to solve. There's a focus on users, on people. So we're including all the people who have interaction with the system in question, really getting these user needs. This is typically a lightweight method. It's from a systems engineering perspective, it's not a replacement for requirements capture. It's a method to get us closer to what we see as better requirements, really capturing the who, why, what of a system requirement. Recorded methods typically informal. We use index cards or post-it notes. Really try and get away from the rigidity some people may see for a requirements approach. Basically to discuss the desired functionality, basically in simple language that everyone understands. In terms of where this sits, reference to the V model, I'll quickly jump. We sit here at what we call at the concept model stage, where we go through the viability of the whole system and the solution, basically trying to glean these top level system requirements. In terms of outcomes, we get a scope of the system of interest, again, any dependencies. A key use of user stories as well is really developing a high level early plan of technical deliverables, functional priorities and lifecycle planning. This is key to us as it does allow us to create definition of a minimum viable product as well in terms of what are the priorities for the system in interest. and it's also integral to developing a concept of operations, which I know we'll be discussing later on in the session. But again, as well as user stories, hand in hand with user stories, we do also use techniques around use case modeling as well. Again, this is not a replacement for requirements. They're there to glean our requirements, set the scope. We can use as validation criteria. It allows an early look at a high level at potential solutions, also supports early technology reviews as well. As we are at this point in the V model, we are solution agnostic. I think it's keen to point that out as well. The fact that we're not in the solution space at this point in time. We're trying to frame the problem in hand, but what we can do is we can develop an all-encompassing model, and it can reference user stories as well as the relevant use cases. But use case models from a systems engineering approach are useful in describing the functions and behaviours of the system, which are often overlooked, and it'll also allow early interface identification. And typically at this point, we don't necessarily require subject matter expertise. It is a simple model, and in typical Blue Peter style, if any of us are old enough to remember, here is one I prepared earlier. So I've taken an example of a passenger counting system. Again, this is a real high-level model of a system of interest. There's no subject matter expertise to develop at this level. The complexity can come at further iterations, but the key is that this is easy to understand. It's clear and abstract. We can demonstrate to all stakeholders, really, in terms of what the model needs to be. Again, these tools, techniques, user stories and use case modeling, not a replacement for definition of good requirements. They're a stepping stone to get us to develop these requirements. Through the model, we can show relationships and hierarchies and traceability between functions of a system as well. And that's where we are. So I will pass back over to yourself, Cole. Thank you again.
Thank you, Arvinder. Very nice, concise presentation there. So I don't know what seems to be back on my screen. I do apologise. I'd just like to, if I could now introduce Greg Katica, who's the head of engineering from Southwestern Railways. He's very kindly agreed to come to talk to us today about developing what I think personally is one of the key documents or pieces of work in systems engineering, which is the concept of operations. And Greg, like I say, he's the head of engineering for Southwestern Railways, who are currently undergoing a number of very exciting and interesting projects, including an upgraded fleet on the Isle of Wight. And so, Greg, I'll pass over to you. Thank you very much for being with us here today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, Carl. It's a privilege to be able to talk to you this afternoon. As Carl has said, I will be discussing developing concepts of operations, and clearly you can tell from my employer that I also speak from the operator's perspective. So a lot of the things I will cover, you will have heard Diane eloquently explain why they're important and why that point of view needs to be considered. So that's what I'll cover. Those areas there. Ignore obviously questions because they're to be done later. So let's start then. Clearly, the business that others have alluded to.
Greg, have you shared slides? Because we can't see them at the moment, sorry.
Right. Is that better, Carl? Excellent.
That's great, sorry.
Just for the record, I'm a mechanical engineer, not an electrical or electronic engineer, so excuse my IT handicap.
We won't hold it against you, Greg, we promise.
Thank you very much. So our entire business then, as Diane mentioned in her introduction, is the moving of, well, people in my case, but goods in the case of other operators. And therefore, it's important that before we consider any detail regarding systems within systems, or any technological advancement we wish to make, we need to understand the context in which we work. And these are just some of the factors that came to mind whilst putting this together. And these are the sorts of factors that we need to consider, not just should a new system or an improvement to a system bring benefits in these areas, but also should the system interact with other systems, as they inevitably do, that these factors and others are not compromised. And that's for me, that's the question I ask myself when I review, whether it's an engineering change submission or a supplier is trying to sell me stuff. Inevitably, that's the question I ask myself. And not just how does it help, but also how does it avoid cocking other things up, quite frankly, which are vital to the running of the railway. So some factors for consideration then. Firstly, and I appreciate this is stating the obvious, but I think it's well worth mentioning because, like Diane, I too have been on the receiving end of systems that haven't worked very well and have created problems. And inevitably in engineering, it's our job to sort out these problems, which would be fine, but we tend to have plenty of our own problems to sort out before we start importing new ones, especially when they're avoidable. And it's not particular to the railway industry either. Before coming to this industry, I was a soldier, and many times problems I had to solve in that particular line of work also came from the same reason, and that is the single fundamental thing. What are we trying?
Greg, you're on mute.
Greg, I believe you're on mute there.
You have, yeah, you have, Greg. Sorry, I was just going to say we've got a problem, but no, you got on mute. Sorry.
No, I have the spacebar as a trigger for the slide, but of course that also on Teams does mute, as you've kindly pointed out. Forgive me. The point here, though, is making sure that whatever system we are implementing or system we are improving, that it's actually trying to solve a problem and is not a it's not being imported with searching for a problem to solve. The important thing is, as we go back to the previous slide, is that whatever technological improvements we wish to make, they need to help us achieve our central function of being a transport undertaking and not being a prototyping house for elegant solutions. And that links on to the second point, which is who else is affected by what we're doing. The railway undertaking is not an entity that operates in a self-contained environment. We have an infrastructure manager, certainly in my case, apart from the Isle of Wight, whom we don't want to have create problems with. You will recall, no doubt, that a few years ago when we were reintroducing the Class 442 fleet onto the Wessex route, we had signal interference issues that were certainly not foreseen at the time. And that is a good example of where a system improvement, as it was designed to be, was rolled out, but it had unforeseen consequences which did anything but improve the travelling experience for anybody, including ourselves, clearly. Other operators, again, for some of our most busy routes, some of our trunk routes to the north, which are also major freight arteries, is what you're doing for a passenger perspective helpful for a freight perspective, for example. And also the railway neighbour. We've spoken about sustainability earlier. Noise pollution is becoming an ever increasing the problem, which is in isolation quite interesting, given that the noise of contemporary traction and rolling stock tends to be a lot less than it was in the past. Nonetheless, we have a much keener ear, if you'll excuse the pun, for this sort of thing, and it's important that all of these aspects are considered whilst in the genesis of making system improvements or system introductions. One of the things that obviously this package from RIA is focusing on is the idea of the railway as a complex system within a system, and therefore, when one is to introduce a system, something else that we're keen to make sure that we do is look at the interaction of the system with others. Again, it sounds simple, but it's very easy not to. The example I gave just now of the Class 442 and the track circuit interference in a couple of areas. Perhaps with hindsight, the project could have considered a lot more closely what had changed with the signalling system since that class of traction and rolling stock was last run on that same route. And perhaps some of these problems might have been avoided, for example. And it's very important that we assess anything that we do before rolling it out, because the impact, should things go wrong, is quite significant. Worst case, you have service disruption. Sorry, best case rather, you have service disruption and reputational damage. But the worst case, potential safety issues, or indeed the shutting down of the whole network, which is obviously something that is best avoided at all costs. And on a similar theme, post-installation testing is an absolute must as well, and something that I'm personally very suspicious of when I receive scopes of work and proposals to do things, when no consideration has been given at all to testing prior to rollout. I've said before, the railway is a transport undertaking. It is not a prototyping house for trying out new ideas on the off chance that they might be any good. And the other thing that we have to consider, which with all due respect, I don't think the supply chain always remembers, is that it is the operator's name on the side of a train. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. It, by default, becomes the operator's problem to manage when things go wrong. And if people think the operator's to blame and they choose to travel elsewhere, that doesn't help anybody in the railway if we lose passengers to other modes of transport. So whilst it might seem several degrees of freedom between the testing of a modification, for example, and the long-term health of the rail industry, I can assure you there is not much of a gap between the two. And thinking beyond the immediate the system itself, and you look at other elements of the industry, I've already touched on using the example of signalling and rolling stock, for example, as an interface there, so I won't labour that point. But it's always worth, as with any type of engineering in the railway environment, look at what the law and the standards say, because there may be things there that perhaps were not considered when the system was being conceived that ought to be before it will be rolled out. And I've always found particularly helpful, certainly from a rolling stock perspective, reviewing the interface parameters as defined in RIS 8270, which I know is a route level standard, but it does have some very useful elements in there for helping frame a system in the context with which it will be used and how it might interfere with others. And of course, the engineering change process, which all operators have to bring in new modifications or changes, we'll always look for these things anyway. So if we're able to look at these at the start of a project as opposed to at the end when we're trying to roll it out, a lot of inconvenience will be saved. So I've actually been asked to talk about a concept of operations. What do all those points that I've just discussed mean in terms of concepts of operations? Using the generic conventional engineering design process as a handrail, if you like, how can we ensure that our system, our change to a system, replacing a system, whatever it might be, will have the desired effect without any of the negative side effects that we've covered. So when we come to the understanding our problem, the first stage of our process, this is the point where, in my view, we ought to be looking at who else is affected, from the passenger to the user, the maintainer, our neighbours, whoever it might be. Make sure we know who these people are, and this isn't a paper exercise. This is actually going to speak to these people and bring them into to developing our system. And when it comes to generating solutions, at this point, we should be unearthing the detail we need to see how we might affect other systems, whether it is ECM, for example, whatever it might be, gauging, whatever physical thing it might be, compared to data gathering, data management, for example. Does this data interfere with someone else's data they gather that forms a useful part of running the organisation? For example, passenger counting information, if that's used to help drive the marketing strategy for tickets, for example. And when we come to developing the system, in my view, now is a sensible time to look at where the standards dictate that we need to do some formal evaluation of interaction between systems, and also trying to work out what the impact is going to be. It's not always easy at this stage to quantify the impact of whatever system it is that we might be dealing with. But if we're going to be able to explain to our stakeholders what we're doing and how what we're doing might impact them, it is useful to have an idea of the scale of the change. Assessing and testing, I've mentioned before, absolutely vital, especially if it's something that's novel. The pace of change in digital technology, again, as previous speakers have mentioned, is such that we can do things now that a decade ago were, well, certainly to me, were almost inconceivable. But we need to make sure we understand fully the impact of these things on our core business of moving people and freight around. And then when we come to evaluating how successful our system has been, it's important to understand, to close the loop, if you like, and understand that we've looked at how it works. It does do what we intended it to do and nothing else. And more importantly, that the stakeholders we identified right at the beginning, who are affected by the system, are also of the same view. Because there's no point in me saying from a technical perspective the system is great when it's upsetting Network Rail, for example, on the infrastructure side, or our commercial partners from a business point of view. So that, in essence, is the approach to take. Very simple in outline, which I think is quite useful for having it as a concept to follow whilst implementing a system or making changes to a system, but always putting our core business at the centre of our decision-making process. So we're not doing anything that makes our life as a transport undertaking more difficult. So just to wrap up, then, we have to. Our concept of operations must always consider our context in terms of being a railway undertaking. Think about the impact we have on other systems. Sure, we test to make sure we do what we say we'll do and we don't have any unintended side effects, and also ensure that everyone else that is involved or impacted is satisfied, because it's not, the railway undertaking does not exist in isolation, as we've discussed. And the two elements of guidance that I'd refer to from a legislative or standards point of view are the two that you see there, interoperability regs and a RIS that I think is quite useful. I appreciate there's a rolling stock bias there as well, but there are others. I've just put them up there as talking points to get things started. So Carl, thank you very much. That's it from me, and I look forward to questions later.
Thank you very much, Greg. May I just say, for all the speakers so far, thank you so much. I've never seen so much information delivered so wonderfully concisely, because you've really caught us up on the time and that, but yet, judging by the amount of chat that's going on in the chat, there's a lot of content there, and certainly I saw it as well. Thank you very much, Greg, and don't worry about the rolling stock bias, because we have quite a few people from Network Rail joining the panel afterwards, so I hope you're not going to be outnumbered on that side. We I hopefully some of our rolling stock colleagues are on the call as well to join you. Thank you very much, though. Moving on to our final presentations before we actually get into the panel discussion. I'd now like to welcome Chris Lambert and Katja Soa from Atkins, who are part of the S&C Laveling Group, who I must first apologise to, because somehow their invitations got lost in the email this morning. Thankfully, we managed to get things sorted out before they joined. So thank you very much, Chris and Katja, for being here today. They are both senior consultants who work in Atkins AD and ADS&T division, which I'm sure they'll explain more of, where they do a lot of work for the defence and security industries, but are also starting to work within rail. And they're going to be talking to us about enterprise architecture and how we can use it to bring all of these great concepts that have been discussed together. So, Katja and Chris, thank you very much for being here today, and I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Carl. That's great. It's both Katja and I are really pleased to be able to present to you guys. Of course, ADS&T, as part of the Atkins group, may not be as well known to you as other parts of Atkins. So what we'd like to do is maybe touch upon that first before getting into what we do as consultants within ADS&T and how we use enterprise architecture techniques to help our clients solve business problems. And it's really about how we understand, want to get across to you, our approach to applying enterprise architecture is supporting organizations apply new technology and get better value out of innovation. So if we just move on to the next slide. It's all very, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Atkins as a business. It's part of the S&C Laveling Group. Our three key main areas of activity are energy, transportation, infrastructure. I thought I'd just drop in a few other company names. Faithful and Gould, I'm sure you're well aware of within the rail industry. There'll be other organisations that you may not be, like Acuity, which is very much involved in strategic and economic planning in an advisory role within very large infrastructure projects. Its centre of gravity is mainly in the Middle East, which is where most of these large infrastructure programs happen. And we as ADS&T sit in the consulting advisory space as well. The D and the S standing for defence and security, which is probably where most of our business is at the moment. The A stands for aerospace, and our primary activity in that business is really to help clients take advantage of the rapid changes in technology and material science to help them optimize the design and reduce manufacturing and operational costs. That's probably the main thing that we do there. Within defence, really our main role is to help governments specify and acquire military and infrastructure, military equipment and infrastructure, ranging from naval facilities and fighting vehicles to logistics support solutions. And the T in the ADS&T is technology. And that's really where Katya and I sit, very much in consultancy and advisory part of ADS&T. So it's about helping organisations in change management, understanding how to manage the complexity of change within highly regulated environments. And really we focus in on digital transformation, and we're part of the Digital Advantage practice. So really, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Katya, she'll take us through the techniques that we deploy. So just there you go.
Thank you very much, Chris, and good afternoon. So enterprise architecture. As surely a topic for more than half an hour, so we'll try to rattle through, as I'm sure all the other very good presentations today were. So a quick overview. So I think if you look at how can we solve problems, when we look at the world today, what are the problems? And we've identified three, and I'm sure there's a plethora of more, but three key things that are happening today. Change is surely driven by digital technology innovation today. I'm sure there's also organizational change, business change that trickles down into the technology part of the organization. But very often it also is the other way around. So, well, this new technology is coming along. How can we use it? What can we do with it? But also change is more incremental. I mean, when I started my career, there were a lot of big bang changes with lots of effort put in, but today that's not the case, is it? So we have lots of little things that can be quite impactful, but we're no longer looking, oh, so this happens in the next 10 years. We rather look at this happens in the next 10 months. And also kind of, I mean, that's probably my personal thing, but we're never done. We're never finished projects. We constantly look at what's next, what's the next increment, how can we improve what we just implemented? So I think that that's something that is certainly very, very, very obvious these days. But also, what feeds into that is the high speed of technology innovation. I mean, it's almost every year something new comes along, or an existing technology makes leaps and bounds in what it can actually do. And that also leads to a proliferation of solutions for any business problem. So if you say, I have business problem this, you go out to the market, look for actually technology solutions, there's hardly ever only one. There's at least 10, 12, or at least 3, half a dozen, depending on the problem. So how do you choose which one is the best one for your problem? And as I said, IT has become a driver for business change as well. But also, and I'm a techie, whenever I talk to finance people, I go, like, we're not speaking the same language, but because of that, the cost models are changing. And I know from some of our clients that especially finance is really struggling with getting the grips on that, the move from CapEx to OpEx. How much is this going to cost? And we have to tell them, well, we cannot give you an exact figure because it is as a service. We pay as we go. So that really is a problem. So how do you change in an agile delivery, from an agile delivery model? How does that go all the way to your agile procurement? And I'm sure that especially the bigger the organization and the more regulated the funding is, the more difficult it becomes, because you cannot just go away and say, well, we see as the bills come in, we see what happens. So that simply doesn't work, right? So what does that result in? So we have a large number of programs and projects running at any one time in parallel. So it's not just one you finish and then the next one. We have that increased complexity in our technology landscape. So we have a client that has in one of their business units 2,500 applications. You let that sink in. 2,500. What are they all doing? Do I need that many? But also we have that increased complexity in budgeting and cost modeling. So that's happening today. So what are the actual challenges around that? So we have two things moving at the same time. So we have the business with its operations, its processes, its people, its skills, resources. And we have that technology that feeds that enables new things. And they're moving at a different pace. So the technology programs, they can move much faster than organizational change. So I can deliver 5 solutions before I've even looked at one of my key business processes and how that needs to adapt to make full use of that new technology. So how do my business processes need to change to fully be able to leverage that new technology? What we also have as a challenge is what I spoke about, the complexity. So that is just getting more and more of a challenge to how to manage that. At the same time, I'm not just delivering new stuff. I need to look after my existing things, my legacy, my technical debt. It's all piling up and it's still costing me. It's costing me to keep the lights on. That really is a problem. How do I get rid of it? How do I keep the data I still need and transition that to the new systems? And we spoke about the proliferation of those new solutions. So they add to that. And then all over it are the interdependencies. What happens if I turn this off? What else breaks? But also I've got multiple environments to look at. So it's not just on-premise, my data center in a secure location. And all of a sudden I've got public cloud, I've got hybrid cloud. So I'm actually exchanging data and information between my on-prem and my off-prem. I have as a service. Well, what do they do with my data? So all these things add to a massive complexity of that landscape. But also, how do I know that the procurement of solution A actually supports my strategic goals? I want to, I don't know, say I want to be more effective in that particular service that I provide. I want to be 5% quicker, or I want it to cost 2% less. So how do I know that the solution I'm just procuring and spent money on actually contributes to that strategic goal? But also, Project X delivered some benefits. So do they link to these objectives? I mean, all these benefits sound great, but do they actually link to my objectives and support these? But also, where should I actually put my money and why? So all these questions and challenges that we're facing today. And enterprise architecture can play a big role in helping with these challenges. So what is it? And I think even that we could probably talk about for quite a while. I really like the Federation of Enterprise Architecture Professional Organizations definition. So because there's a key things in there. So to apply architecture principles and practices, so things, how we're going to do this, to guide organizations through changes and to execute their strategies. I think that's a really spot on definition. So what does it mean? So enterprise architecture looks enterprise-wide, as the name says, but looks at coherence between strategy, business, operations and IT and other technology, I have to say, although most of it will be IT. So it's quite a broad scope, really. I've read one almost like two simple definitions, say making strategy operational. So I've got the strategy, I want to achieve this. How do I actually do it? So that's where enterprise architecture can be a big help. to give direction on the evolution of the enterprise as well, to help actually shape those strategies. And that is something that's more and more becoming a objective of enterprise architecture, to actually help shape this strategy, looking where the organization wants to go, but also what it needs to get there. To see where you want to go is almost easier to define. So I really like TOGAF is a framework, one of the probably key best practice frameworks for architecture. And they have published something called Architecture Content Framework Meta Model. What I like about this, I hope you can read it, is that it covers all of what they define as enterprise architecture is. There's a lot of specialism in there, like business architecture, like information systems architecture, and surely there's a lot more detail in there. But enterprise architecture really tries to cover all of this and put it into one coherent view or number of views to really understand how this all ties together. So how can we help? Okay, so now we kind of know what it is. How does this now help? How does it help with the business and technology velocity? So what and that's what the picture down there basically says is enterprise architecture can translate business language into technology requirements. And the other way around as well. So traditionally, when I started my career, I had a business says, we want this, and the techie says, okay, here's your 10 servers and that new software. But now we have also the driver from technology, things like AI and ML that started to become a driver for things. So that says, right, so we need this, but how do we, do we need this? Everyone does it. Is it a good thing? How can we leverage this? So, and to make sure that the business needs are understood and the right solution is chosen. And I think that is also something that I've seen in my career, that the business says, okay, so we need this. And then there was a business case and they were advised to go for this solution and they went for this solution and then realized, well, that's not really what we wanted. So to really translate between those two drivers, that's something enterprise architecture really can help. Also to identify how emerging technologies actually can create opportunities so that the business doesn't even know about, to say, look, this is coming up, this is new, we've assessed it against our particular organization, and we think we can actually use this to create opportunities, to create a competitive advantage possibly, but also just to add value to the enterprise by integrating this in a strategic way, not just jumping on the next train, excuse the pun, but saying, oh, this is new, let's do this. It's like, this is new, let's do this, but there's a reason why, and this is how it fits in. I think this is one of the key messages we want to bring, because how it all fits in, I think that is really, really important. But also how we can help is we got two almost competing roadmaps. We have a business roadmap and we have a technology roadmap. So we need to ensure that they are not going at the same pace, but they are aligned. So we don't want to lose that velocity by implementing the wrong thing at the wrong time or the right thing at the wrong time. So I think that is really, really important. There are other things how architecture can help. So coming back to the complexity. So what we need to do is we need to understand it first. Before we do anything, we need to understand it. So enterprise architecture is able to abstract and to create logical views of the enterprise by grouping functionality. And I think that is certainly a key skill of architects, to take a step back and say, okay, what we're actually really looking at is not system A, that particular class has an API that requests this. That does not help understand complexity. So we need to take a step back and move at the right level of detail so that all the stakeholders understand what we're talking about. So we create big pictures so that basically each of those blocks in the big picture are still managed by my SME. So they still look at APIs and interfaces, what you want, or particular business processes and operations. But I need to understand the big picture, and I need to highlight interdependencies between systems. So what happens if I turn this off? So that only comes when I understand the complexity, and we use models to do that. And only then can I conquer it. So I standardize, develop principles and reference architectures. So to reduce diversity and proliferation, to say, well, we can still innovate, but these are the boundaries. That's the boundary we do it in. But also to capture the capabilities of, for instance, in this case, my applications. So do I really need 5 HR systems? Do I need, so that kind of a way of looking at it. And then duplicates, are there any gaps? Can I reuse? So business unit A comes, okay, so we need a solution for this. And the enterprise architect then says, well, business unit B already has a solution. Can you use this one? What are your requirements? And then really sit down with business unit A and say, okay, so what do you really need? What do you need it for? Why do you need it? Very often, stakeholders already have a solution in mind without really understanding the problem. So enterprise architects can help. And one of the key things we do is modeling, obviously thinking in boxes and lines and making visualizing the problem and really helping everyone to understand what's going on. So the goal here is not to stall complexity. We don't really want to stall or get rid of it necessarily entirely, but we need to be able to manage it. Complexity in itself is not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if you're not able to manage it. And the last kind of big ticket item is the investments. So by creating that end-to-end visibility, by being able to link project outputs or benefits to actual strategic direction, we can actually link solutions to drivers or objectives or key user requirements to understand the why. So why do we need this? We can also link them to capabilities and business processes, and to really understand which ones are critical to my business pursuit, and which ones are the supporting processes, and do we really need to invest in this now? And to really help, what is the problem and also where is it? So you remember the slide just before, we do all this modeling. So that helps us not to say what the problem is, but where is it actually? So using roadmaps, using heat maps, maturity assessments, that really helps inform decisions where to invest and where you actually get the most value. And also coherence and strategy realization. So by defining principles and reference architectures, we basically can ensure that the organization is investing in the right things, or at least helping the decision makers with making the decision. So yeah, and then obviously inform the scope of programs and projects as well. We ourselves as consultants find ourselves more firefighting. So the programs or projects have already started, and started again, and realizing we're actually not really delivering what we wanted to. And so we come in as consultants and say, okay, right, take a step back. What do you actually want trying to achieve? And then trying to bring that coherence and reference architectures in and so on. So now one thing that enterprise architecture is accused of sometimes is, oh, how can this be agile? You know, you're making plans for 5 years. How can this be agile? Well, it is. It is if you can do this in the right way. So, for instance, what we as Atkins are helping our clients with is saying, well, you don't have to go into all the detail in your enterprise architecture functions or practices and define every little bit. What you may want to consider is provide a framework for that strategic direction, because the enterprise architecture practice or function is tied in with the strategic parts of the business. They know where their business is going and why, and what they want to achieve. So that trickles basically down into the solution architecture space and the technology roadmap. And as I said earlier, they need to be aligned. So the enterprise architecture function really focuses on principles and governance, providing that framework or scaffolding, so that solution architects and the projects or programs can still be flexible. They can still say, well, our solution is best placed on Azure and not AWS for this particular reason. So as an architecture function, enterprise architecture function, do I really need to say, no, we're only doing AWS? That's it. So we don't want to stifle innovation. We want to be able to still deliver innovative, best fit solutions for particular problems. So that's the way we see enterprise architecture working. And what it needs is an agile mindset. So doing just enough architecture to stay ahead of highly agile teams and delivery teams, but also strong drive for collaboration, obviously. So we need to keep talking to all the stakeholders involved to really understand where's everyone going, where they're going, where they're going. So that results in flexible architecture, flexible enough to really deliver those strategic outcomes that the organization wants. But it's also adaptive to change. I mean, how often do requirements change? You have a set of 100 requirements. You start, in your project, you go look at solutions. You say, all right, I got it. Half a month later, key stakeholder comes in. No, actually, no, we don't want this anymore. We rather want this. So it needs to be adaptive to change, but without losing sight of those long-term objectives. Make sure it's all a strategic fit. So going back to Chris for a summary.
Right. Are you able to hand control over? Because I think
Yes.
I've lost control of my mouse.
You should have that now.
Great. Oh, yes, I've got my mouse back. Thanks, Katja. As you can see, I think enterprise architecture is a hugely complicated, complex world that we're living in. And we see enterprise architecture as a tool to help organizations control that complexity and manage it effectively, because it's not going away. I think from my background in automotive, I can say that the design of vehicles is becoming so much more complicated, but it's making the vehicles much easier for someone to drive and use and live with in principle. And I think it's the same kind of change that's happening within the rail industry with the adoption of digital technologies. It's going to make things more complicated, but if we can get a grip of that complexity and help organizations manage it, then that's the way in which we can improve the effectiveness of the deployment of innovative ideas. And it kind of splits into two here. It's about helping to manage the interface between the technology domain and the business domain, between the technical architect and the business manager. And I think the primary problem that we've got here is, as Katja mentioned, is really the velocity of change, and actually the stepping stones, the direction of change, really. In terms of technology, innovation, it's typically rapid and disruptive. In terms of the business domain, the voice of the customer, that's the driver of change, really, in business, is much more consistent and evolutionary, but it's a constant that's happening. It's a constant drive for organizations to adapt, and the organizations that succeed most are those that can identify the voice of the customer moving and are able to adapt to that more quickly than their competitors. And what we see is in the top level here with the technology domain, it's characterized by technology initiates it. It's a question of figuring out how you can use technology to improve processes, and then people typically then think about, okay, what benefit is that process improvement going to give? And that typically leads to the charge of technology coming up with very good solutions in search of an appropriate problem. And what we're trying to do here, I think, with enterprise architecture that's sitting in the middle, is about helping organizations to manage that complexity, about helping people to understand and start perhaps with the voice of the customer to find out what technology is out there that will drive the business value that we see our customer wanting, and how do we generate that benefit from the technology. And it's a complex world, and as you can see here, I've just flashed up a number of tools that we use, target operating models, it's Ishikawa's for dependency analysis and so on and so forth. But we just wanted to, in this half-hour slot, just leave you with a taster of our thinking, just really highlighting, I think, the primary challenge that we've got is managing the language, the conversation between technologists with the great ideas and the business people who've got a day-to-day business to run. And it's helping those two stakeholders work together and use each other's skills effectively to deliver the introduction of new technologies, introduction of innovative ideas more efficiently quite effectively. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Katja. Very for a very too short a time, obviously, to talk about such an in-depth subject. Very good and precise and concise presentation, in my opinion. Thank you very much for coming today. If you could leave your cameras on, and if I could invite all the other speakers we've had to put their cameras back on as well as some additional people who have agreed to join the panel, such as David Rowe and Imtithal from Network Rail. If you're Aziz, sorry, from Imtithal Network Aziz, if you're on from Network Rail. Hi, Imtithal. I believe. Hi, David. Thank you for joining us. I think also Helen might be joining us from Capgemini, and also Derek, if you want to put yours on as well, you're going to be involved later in the week. You're welcome to join this as well. That's Derek Price, sorry, if I'm not there, and there he is. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can I also at the moment just give a quick shout out to my colleague Sam Bemmons, who's been very kindly gathering all your questions from the chat while we've been speaking. I'd like to go through as many of them as I can, but there's two that I'd like to bring to the top, if that's okay, to start things off. So I think they're quite important. First one is one that actually was directed at you, Greg, but I think I'd like to get everyone's input on this. And it's the classic question, but I think quite important one. When should we? Let me just bring. I'll just find out who actually asked it originally. And it was the question from Malcolm de Bell. So Malcolm, I don't know if you'd like to ask the question about when is the best time to involve people who will use the system. Malcolm, are you there? Sorry, are you still on?
Hello. Yes, I'm here. You've seen the question, and everyone's answered it very gratefully. Of course, that leads to the supplementary. And when you're in a competitive situation and someone's had to bid, say, a new design of train as their franchise, and they've settled some of the important parameters of that train in the bid, how can you involve the passengers, the operators, and the maintainers then?
Is that at the bidding stage, Malcolm, beforehand, or after, once that's been completed?
Well, I'm thinking of right at the beginning.
Well, the answer is they have to be brought in at that stage if an operator is to have any hope of success in terms of winning the bid and then being successful as the incumbent. To give you an example, although I wasn't with SWR at the time, we as part of our bidding, we conducted lots of focus groups with passengers on the various lines of route to determine what their priorities were. And one of the things that they said to us was on the Portsmouth Direct, people on that route wanted intercity type trains, not outer suburban stock, which is the principal driver for bringing the Class 442 fleet back into traffic. Was to provide sufficient long distance trains to enable them to run on that route as well. Clearly, that project hasn't worked out as intended for a number of reasons, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. But that's an example by where we do that. And I should imagine all operators would do exactly the same thing if they're to have any chance of success. There's no reason for any even for a solution that appears a purely technical exercise at first, there is absolutely no reason why the passenger should not be considered at the start. To give you an example, one of the things that we're working on with our Network Rail colleagues is the fitting of monitoring equipment onto our trains to record the infrastructure, which is in our interest because it enables Network Rail to make more timely repairs to the infrastructure. It's in the infrastructure manager's interest because it enables them to better target their resources. So you might say, well, where's the benefit to the passenger there? But clearly, if the infrastructure is more robust, there's less service disruption for them. But also, if we're adding new equipment to our fleets, that increases the maintenance burden on them. So one of the things we consider is downtime. If any length of the exam is going to be extended, how does that affect our ability to provide longer trains, for example? So even for the most technological solution to a problem, there is always the passenger element somewhere. Yep, so it should always be considered.
Thanks very much, Greg. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Anyone else like to just pick up on that about where we should involve people, particularly? Can I ask the question about thinking about not just from out of the passenger's point of view? Obviously, for Greg and organisations like his, the passengers are obviously a very important element. I'm thinking more for particularly on the infrastructure side, where their customers are effectively the likes of Greg and Diane, who are the actual operators. Although Diane, of course, your company also manages the infrastructure, of course. Is there anyone does anyone have a view on that about for when we should be involving the people who are going to actually operate the system from the operations side, like our union members and our maintainers? And Derek, I see you're straight in there. I thought you might have a view on that, Matt.
Yeah, hi everyone. Speaking from the point of view from an infrastructure project, I think there's two primary threads. One is the formal contract that gets placed, which went down to
Sorry, Derek, we seem to have lost you. You might have to.
Hi, can you hear me again? Yeah.
We can now, sir. We can now.
Right. Yeah. Sorry about that. From an infrastructure project point of view, there's two primary threads that come to mind. One is the placing of a contract, and then we're into kind of classic good requirements management, formal stakeholder management, things like that. But then all the way through, there are various forums and groups, either through passenger groups or the role of the sponsor on a project, to provide and plan for the regular touching base with an operator or a maintainer or a passenger representative, whether it's on a train or going to a station through. However, it is a complex environment to find the right groups of people to make contact with. That's what I'd say.
Okay. Derek, while you're on, another one that I actually, just while we've got you here, one of the other questions that I wanted to bring forward was actually the one that you raised on secret of success. I don't know if you would like to relay that one for the panel's viewers, yeah?
It was after listening to Chris and Katya. Thank you for that, about enterprise architecture. I'm interested in your secrets of success. I think it's fair to say that there's been a number of attempts to get real benefit from application of architecture methods across a range of railway projects and programs. What do you think are the key enablers for a successful first application, which then goes on to become a lasting success, where the architecture is used again and again rather than a really good one-off? To be honest, is where I've seen it used most.
I think there's a few things that come to mind. As a really good question, by the way, I really like it. So I think the key is, as always, the key stakeholder buy-in. So that is senior business users, project sponsors, project owners, business leaders, all the way to CIO, CTO, depending on what you're looking at and what part of your organization. I think that's absolutely key, that they understand why are we trying to change things around here, and introducing even more governance. I think that is something that often is, another meeting to go through, another one, they need to sign this off. And also I think
we seem to have lost you for a moment there, Katya. Sorry. Seem to have lost you.
Yes.
Chris, are you still there, or have we lost both of you?
I am indeed, and she was doing so well.
Yeah. Can you pick it up, Chris? Or
how do I follow that? No, I think what Katya is saying is really absolutely right. It's about getting the stakeholder buy-in at all levels, and my experience is that it works best when the goals are clear, and you've got to start with the clear objectives as to why you're doing it, and be able to describe it. From my background, it's the voice of the customer is really important. If people can trace back the detailed issue back to a voice of the customer objective, then it makes it so much easier for people to converge on the agreed path forward. Because my experience, most of the disagreements occur not because people fundamentally don't share the same objectives, it's because there's miscommunication going on, and it's this inability to really clearly explain the individual issues that stakeholders have, to give you the necessary clarity at a CXO level to be able to balance those conflicting requirements in order to optimize the total system performance, as it were.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Derek, I think it's only fair actually with that one. I probably should give Imtathal a chance to see if she has any view on this, obviously, since she's looking at it from your side. So let's see if you would like to.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Carl. Yes, I think I will echo as we are doing enterprise architecture or following the whole system approach within Target 190 within Network Rail. I think it's a valid question. I think it's a question we've been asking ourselves anyway. But I will echo what has been said by Chris and Katia. It's fundamentally, it's getting the buy-in, but a lot of it is to do with the agile approach as well, and the communication element of it, making sure obviously the target we are hitting, the issues we're trying to resolve, continuous engagement, because obviously enterprise architecture by nature allows that element of collaboration. But by presenting some of these results early on and showcasing some of the benefit, because a lot of the time is people not necessarily able to kind of visualize or comprehend what is it that they're, where is the added value, if you like. So for me, it's about showcasing this aspect of it, and obviously having clear strategy from the onset, or a clear target, which often is missed in terms of having an end goal, if you like, and then working backwards by building steps in terms of how that end goal can be realized or reached, because this is about long-term thinking, not just short-term. It allows you to build in short-term and achieve the end goal, but by having those type of key benefits and key capabilities that you're willing to hit, you start to build the picture. And obviously the key to anything is bringing people along the journey with you.
Yeah, thanks, Matilda. I think that's brings up a really interesting point, which I think actually will lead, I'm going to use as a hopefully a segue to lead to another question that someone's posed, because I think it brings up the whole point that one of the key things, a lot of this is communication, and communicate. And one of the key roles of the systems engineer is to communicate very complex things to very varied stakeholders. And Richard Jones, I know you've asked a question on that about how do we can we get Richard? I don't know if you'd like to ask your question that you put in the comment box.
Yeah, I'm just going to give you a quick bit of camera for a moment and then switch it off. I was going to ask which rail project panelists were willing to give up in order to get broadband fibre to every home in the UK, but I thought it was even for me, a provocateur though I am, that would be a step too far, so we won't ask that one. Look, you're all enormously intelligent and erudite people. You understand all this stuff, but you appreciate you're going to be working in projects with engineers that don't. They literally just want to get out there and dig holes and pour concrete, and they don't understand why you're holding them up. They think that you live in an ivory tower, by the way. So how are you going to convince them? How are you going to get them on side? You know, there have been attempts before, some are more successful than others, shall we say. What techniques do you use with colleagues to get them on side with systems engineering activities and contributing to your work in a project?
Anyone want to take that? Mike?
We will.
Derek has his hand up too.
Well, I'll say, hey, Richard, good to see you again. I do, because I've done many things. I try to put myself in the role of that person. What does that industry, what is their perspective? Put yourself in their shoes for a bit, follow them around, see how they view the world, what kind of decisions they make, what's going into this whole project, and how they're playing into this. Because at part of that time, this construction organization may be just trying to get things built because that's what they're being paid for. But before that, there's several planning activities that maybe need to be understood to understand why certain things have to show up at certain times with certain logistic trails, with certain cost drivers. And truly understanding that so that I can communicate on the benefit of others what's going on, so that not one discipline drives it, but we all drive it together in this integrated approach, and trying to work that together with the different groups to try to build that common perception and that common perspective of what's going on. It takes time. It's a team building exercise. So it goes back to the organizational change thing that I mentioned. If we set this up where everybody's competing and staying stovepipe, then it's hard. If you still building the bonds together where they can talk and see common goals and common benefit, then it works. But it's an ongoing activity. You have to plan for it.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And Derek, if you want to take it on, and Arvinder, I'll give you a chance after that, if that's okay.
All right. Thanks, Carl. Mike, I couldn't agree more. We just said the whole empathy piece. It's a real skill to develop, to learn to empathize with your audience. Don't use system engineering language. use the language of the person we're talking to. And the third one, which really pays off, is stay with them, have staying power, to build up a relationship, to be there when there's a problem, for them to start to make a connection between this weird thing they think you do and things they've seen, and start making the connection with systems terminology. Well, that'll do for me.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. I know you asked a similar question, didn't you, in the chat about BIM and about describing BIM and 3 and 4D CAD, didn't you, as well, which is
yeah,
the important point. So, sorry, thank you very much. Arvinder, over to you, sir. Sorry.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, thank you, Derek. And yeah, I agree with you, Derek, in terms that there is a personal approach as well in making sure we speak the right language, and really to what Mike touched on as well. It's we need to understand the problems. We need to make sure that the problems that we're resolving, we are actually resolving. In terms of how we address this with Harmonic, we go through a transformation workflow. We work together with all functions, which again is important. All functions need to really pull together in terms of trying to resolve these issues and making sure that we do actually deliver what we need to deliver. So we definitely see. I mean, the other experience that we have taken on board is the fact that we have seen issues where the systems engineering approach isn't followed through. And unfortunately, it's not a great method, but unfortunately, when things go wrong, we can point to where systems engineering approach would have helped us, actually made it easier. And again, it's been touched on. It's not a magic pill that'll work. It's not a shortcut. It involves effort, but it involves upfront effort as well. So to not go through that firefighting that we touched on, that we unfortunately traditionally we all seem to be part of, but it's not the best case approach. There's a better way.
No. Thank you very much, Arvinder. That's very good. Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. Greg, sorry, you raised your hand as well, mate.
Thanks, Cole. Just to add to the answers, which I agree with them all, but one of the big things to assist with engagement of a workforce is to avoid giving the impression of coming in, telling people what they're doing wrong, shove a solution down their throats, and then ride off into the sunset afterwards for a contractor's wage, which both from a personal point of view and from that of my department doesn't go down very well at all. So I've given you a problem. As an engineer, you expect me to give a solution, which I'm certainly happy to do. And that is if it's at all possible, especially for outside agencies coming in to support an organisation, is the first part of your order of business shouldn't be to talk about what you're actually going to do. It needs to be to come in, talk with the people you're going to be working with and whom you're wishing to use your system, and see what their views are on the situation in hand, and get to understand their frustrations, their challenges, and their motivations. Because if you do that, you should find the ability to empathise and to communicate, and indeed to sell, will be enhanced. And do not be fooled by the low-tech approach to that. A cup of tea and a chat. Ideally, if there's a nice sunny day at our Bournemouth depot, for example, in the car park where you can see what's going on, it breaks down all sorts of barriers. And it goes a long way towards building up that working relationship. And although it shouldn't, that sort of personal relationship does have a large bearing on whether a project will be successful or not. If you get people's backs up, they will pay lip service to what you're trying to do, and that doesn't help anybody. And thinking about the point I made earlier, we're trying to provide a better service to the travelling public. If our project fails, we fail to achieve our bigger purpose.
Thank you, Greg. That's very useful. Sorry, Arvinder, have you got your hand up again? Sorry, or is that from before?
Yes, I have. I mean, just to touch on Greg's point as well, I think as a human tendency, we're very keen to go for a solution rather than actually understanding and actually exploring the problem space. It's we keep raising this, not a Rails specific issue, probably more of a human tendency. We tend to veer to what appears to be the best solution, and in a lot of cases it's close to the best solution, but it is not the best solution. So yes, definitely get to know the problem, and through methods, as Greg mentioned, get to know your user community, understand where the problem is, where the hot buttons are as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, very good point, Arvind. I mean, we do as systems engineers need to be in amongst the reeds, actually, like Richard was saying, not be seen as being in these ivory towers. Derek, sorry, you've got your hand up again.
I think Greg got me thinking. It's an interesting thread there. I work for Network Rail, so we're often the client. And I think sometimes where we give the impression we're looking for perfection when we specify in contract or something, when actually what we want is more the likes of things that Greg or Arvind have said, is somebody with that sort of head to come in, have a chat, point us in the right direction, without creating a larger document as a deliverable.
Yeah. I must confess, I've always been of the view that, I mean, we used to call systems engineering managing complexity. I've never liked that term. I've always preferred the term simplifying complexity. And my view is that the good systems engineers are the ones who could take aren't the ones who produce like a 100-page document, but can produce a really good one-page diagram, basically, that everyone can understand, really. Yeah. And I think that's a very good point as well, and also be able to speak to a lot of different people from different points of view. Sorry, you've got your hand up again, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's just echoing what everyone says, but I think for me the language is key, and also involving the people in actually using some of it. Doesn't have to be the complex tool. From past experience, one of the successful integrated work that we've done is actually bringing the engineer and give them ownership of the part that they're responsible for, working directly in the tool and interacting. And eventually the transformation was quite significant because they started to understand the issue about the point about system engineering and the integration. So for me, it's more about the whole system thinking is more behavior. There is a behavior element to it, not just the process. And I think sometimes people focus too much on the process and the documentation and forget to bring the people along the journey with them. As I said before, I think it's that simplification and talking the language that people understand and defining the problem as well as possible. A lot of it is brainstorming, and a lot of it is, are we all talking the same language? Because often enough, even if it was a simple language, you coming at it from a different perspective, that then doesn't help when you start delving into the detail immediately. So a lot of kind of early works is quite essential.
All right. Thank you, Tithal. Mike, can you just quickly raise this one, and then well, I want to close this one because I know there's a couple of other people have asked questions. I'd like to see if we can get them up. But go on, Mike. Thank you.
Just quick on. I'll mention Edwin. Avender knows that abstraction. If it gets too down the weeds, raise it up. Get that abstraction layer, so now you can talk about things more logically and less detailed. Go to the detail when you need to, but use that abstraction layer, and you can get through a lot of things.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mike. That's great. Yeah, good point. Yeah, and thank shout out for everyone there. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just to bring out some other questions. I know Jonathan Brown. Are you still on the call? Is Jonathan Brown still on the call? Are you there, Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, no, and I noticed you answered a couple of questions about road mapping and that. I don't know if you'd like to bring them up for the panel. Sorry.
To be honest, they weren't really questions. They were just really more just saying it was really refreshing to see Michael's presentation at the start mentioning road mapping. It's something that I rarely hear in the rail industry, coming from other industries that do utilize it a lot. Yeah. And as we get ever more complex solutions we have to deliver, you know, we really do need to be looking into the future, understanding what may or may not be coming. As Michael said, there is no crystal ball, but at least if you have an idea of where you may be heading, it's better than having no idea whatsoever, which is what tends to happen. So yeah, I just thought everything Michael said was really on point, and learning from other industries is really key. And I posted in the chat some links to some automotive council roadmaps that have just been published, and you can see really the value of these. So you can look at how technologies are maturing, what the rates of those are expected to mature at, and it can help you plan decisions. You know, do you invest today or do you wait? Is it worth retrofitting something or hanging on and doing some new build and so on?
Brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for posting that. Thank you. Can I also say thank you to everyone who's posted some really great links in the chat. Can I also give another shout out to Richard for thank you for posting the link to the ICE report recommending the use of systems engineering and requirements management. And if anyone hasn't read that yet, I really encourage you to click on that link and have a look at it. I just reviewed it this week. It's a really interesting document to read from our civil engineering colleagues there. Bringing in another couple of comments, I think probably actually it's Darren Wilson I know it wasn't a question, but I think it was Darren raised a good point on Diane's question, saying it was how great it was to hear Diane talk about usability of the systems and putting the user at the heart of the design and engineering processes. I think that's very key. Darren, is there anything you want to elaborate on that? Well, if you're still on the call, or
not so much. It was just really refreshing to hear. It's not always something that comes up, so it's great to hear that people at that level are kind of discussing usability and making sure that people using these things are kind of at the forefront of the design process.
Yeah, I mean, and is that Diane? Is that your philosophy going forward for HS1 for most projects? Is that the user at the centre, basically?
100%. And I think the other thing that we all need to be wary of is that as leaders, we're not necessarily going to be the people who are using the systems. So you almost have to kind of put yourself in the shoes of your 16 and 17-year-olds, not in the shoes of the 50 and 60-year-olds as well. So it's, you know, something that may seem difficult for us might not be difficult for someone that's been brought up in a very different way, you know, a different way of learning, a different knowledge base, and so on and so forth. And I think sometimes we forget it. We forget that aspect. That's really, really important. So that's something we try and test in HS1 quite a bit, not what we can do, but what our future users can do.
Thank you, Diane. I'm going to come back to you in a minute, but Arvinder, sorry, you've got something on that as well, sorry.
Yeah, just to build on the points raised, users direct and indirect. I think we're usually quick to miss the indirect users of the system in question. So yeah, just a point on that really. I keep seeing it, unfortunately, but and again, fixing in a firefighting approach, but it's something we just need to put upfront thought and effort around and just get in our clear scope.
Absolutely. Thank you, Arvind. Mike, something from you as well, sorry?
Yeah, real quick, just as Diane mentioned, when I talked about future combat system and when I was redefining a brigade for the U.S. Army in 2004, it was being designed for those who are going to be in command and those who are serving in the Army in 2015 and beyond. People who are still in high school at that time. So what do those people think like? Just like Diane's saying, how do you capture that? Well, you got to integrate, you got to do it over time. You have to migrate, you have to bring in ideas, you have to shape it as you go. But you have to have a vision. With no migration strategy, it all falls apart.
Thank you, Mike. One thing I'll mention is I think we all know as well that I think it's very important that we have operations and maintenance leading a lot of this going forward. And I know there's one organisation which some panel members who are a member of historically have had a completely separation between their projects part and the ops and maintenance. Though as we all know or hope, there is going to be some announcements of that hopefully in the next imminent about, and of course we now have the more regionalisation set up, so hopefully that might help with some of this. It'll be interesting to see how the structure of the industry evolves as we go forward, because ops and maintenance need to be obviously at the base of this, in my opinion, certainly, and they should be leading on what the problems are. They will know the railway best. Diane, while I've got you on there as well, you raised an interesting point about the skills gap as well. I don't know if you'd like to pick up on that, because I think that's an interesting point to have a discussion about.
Yeah, no, I can't remember who posted the question on the chat, but about, you know, what the future capability is. And from the work we've done in NSAR, I chair NSAR, National Skills Academy Rail, we know there's a significant gap, you know, to the extent that we will need roles in 4 or 5 years' time, and we don't even know what they are, just because of the pace of change. But we've got, you know, skills gaps in system engineering, as you know, communications, data, you know, all of those, and you know, and we're behind the curve in terms of making rail an attractive place for people to come to. So there's things we're doing in NSAR. So we've launched routes into rail. So how do we get people to think rail and not think something else? But you know, there is a significant skills gap, and I think the rail reform that you mentioned, Carl, earlier will go sort of some way for the industry to come together to try and collectively address that skills gap rather than doing a piecemeal approach. You know, and that's fundamental. It's what does the industry need, not individual companies.
Very good point, Diane. And actually, it's interesting on that. I've actually on Thursday we've got both in terms of like new people, younger people coming in. We've got both our colleagues from Ukraine talking about some of this work that the universities are doing for encouraging people to get into rail. But we've also got Nick and Usman. I think Usman might be on this call actually from the National College of Advanced Transportation, talking about what they're doing in terms of apprenticeships and so forth, and the importance of what they're training people and systems thinking. So hopefully we'll talk about that a bit more this week as well. But thank you very much for raising it this time. I would also say there was some interesting discussions from Guy Yeomans. I don't know if I've spelled your name there right, Guy, if you're still on. You talk about interdisciplinary mapping and the risk identification. Is there anything you'd like to raise about that? Or is Guy not on the call anymore? I think he's been knocked off, sorry. Is there anything, I've tried to go through as much of the questions. I can't really see anything that I think we've missed or haven't touched on. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to raise with the panel, if they'd like to raise their hands, or just shout out if you want to, just at the moment, if you've got, if you're not sure where the hand is on the Teams function. If anyone wants, feel free to raise their voice if they'd like to raise or ask something. Okay, someone try and ring me there. Oh, we've got Jay. You've got your hand raised, Jay. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I'd just like to put through. I think there was a small piece talked about cost moving from over to OPEX from that CAPEX point. And I get all this bit, but building small or in some cases large cottage industries of engineers that process and develop this and have computer suites that run all this system information and process to give out the data. How does everyone think it will be paid for, or how do they expect it to be paid for? Should that be a concern at your level now, the thinking of what are the TOCs going to be paying for and receiving as an end product?
So who does anyone want to pick that one up? That's a very good question, Jay. Oh, Derek, you're in there straight away.
Go on. Although I'm not a supplier, I do work for a client organisation, and we have a problem of lots of existing management systems, lots of existing information systems. And when something like enterprise architecture or requirements management comes out as a new shiny tool we can use, I think we have a similar problem. And I think by listening to the voice of the user and all the things that the panelists have said, the next step then is to identify which things to stop using, which things to stop doing. And I think that in combination with the good idea of the sort of business risks and opportunities and business benefits that the tool attached to then creates a pool of money, if you like, to do it.
Okay. Greg, do you want to add anything? I noticed you've got your hand up, Greg. Sorry, something?
Yeah, just from a TOC's perspective, if it's a service that we're using, then clearly we'll have to pay for it. There's no two ways about it. And as to how about that funding is generated to pay for it depends on what we're doing. If it's something that's going to be a one-off purchase, then it will perhaps be capital expended. But should it be an ongoing part of business as usual, then we need to build it into our budgets. And if that means rejigging how we spend our money to enable us to pay for it, then that's what we do. It's we go back to our context again of how this system, this data helps us go about our business. We make a decision based upon that assessment.
All right, excellent. Richard, I noticed. Thank you for that, Greg. I think that's it's interesting to see those two different perspectives. Richard, do you want to bring something in? I noticed you've got your hand raised. Sorry.
If somebody queries the cost of doing systems engineering in a project, just explain to them in simple terms that the cheapest and quickest way to do anything is to get it right first time. Yes,
that's true. And one thing I would point out, and I'll expand on that a bit if I may, Richard, because it's a question. Do you want to pay an extra? If I'll pick figures out of my head here, but do you want to pay an extra 5 million at the start of a project to get it right first time? Or do you want to end up paying 50 million later on in the project when everything goes wrong, and also see the project likely overrun by God knows how many years? And I'm sure all of us have had some experience of that. Sorry, Imtithal, sorry, just noticed you've got your hand up as well. Sorry there.
I think I was just going to say the same thing to some extent, is that ultimately you're trying to prevent issues later. This is about integration issue. And I think, as we know, in any modern or upgrade within the railway, we've always had these integration issues which cost you a lot more. these models and these tools help you to understand the benefit, the cost benefit analysis better. At least you are making a good decision, at least at that point, or you apportioning the area of focus in the right area rather than just trying to progress. But ultimately, is the cost of fixing the problem is a lot more higher, not just in terms of in terms of the actual cost and time and delays and everything else. Obviously, there's an element of reputation as well in terms of being able to deliver major upgrade or major programs. So for me, it's the same. I think a lot of smaller technology, a lot of smaller functions face these problems like EMC, electromagnetic interference, which is fundamentally was an add-on at some point. Eventually, people start to realize if you don't consider it, same with security, same with human factor, which are all elements of the whole system thinking and the system engineering aspect. So we need to build in these elements early on, and the cost benefit will balance eventually, if not even tip over in terms of reduction.
Thank you, Amtithal. Very good point. Arvinder, sorry, I know you've got your hand up as well. Sorry.
Yep, it's definitely a valid point in terms of no one wants to go through a program and fix issues later on. I think just to add from a systems engineering approach, the project itself is there to add benefits, to bring efficiency in terms of what we do as well. We talked about a skills gap. It looks at everything from a holistic point of view, not just a box on a train to bring things into context. And that's again more of a bit of a human nature. We tend to focus on what's in front of us. If we look at it from a systems approach, we build in that efficiency, we build in that saving as well.
Thank you, Arvinder. That's very useful. And Mike, I know you seem to have got knocked off and you're back on again. Your hands up. I'll let you go then. Derek, I'll let you have the last word if that's okay. And then because I know I'm probably need to do it. So Mike, if you want to take now, and then we'll
real quick. Like Richard's saying, it's about getting it right. But when you look at systems engineering, well, what does getting it right mean? It means the client, the person who's paying for it, knows what they want, which they probably don't yet and need to grow into that. And that it's actually structured in a way between the contracts and everything else that it gets put together, defined in the right way, and all the stuff gets integrated and it works. So there's a lot to ask there. So what makes that work is the systems engineering process that can grow into this. And sometimes because of time, we need an agile approach to this so that as we grow in time in increments, we have a chance to change our mind or build things up to a point that work, and then make sure it satisfies before we grow to the next thing. So you got this migration, you got this phased approach, increments.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Mike. That's very important. Derek, if you can finish off here, then I'll probably a bit of a close off the formal part of the event, but I'll leave the call open for networking. Go on, Derek.
I'm touched and honoured to get the last word. Thank you, Carl. The front end of life cycle is a very competitive marketplace for the likes of us claiming to do something, giving that front end money to get benefit later on. And we know it works, but I'm also kind of work lots of internal customers. They need to develop confidence to allow us to do it. And in return, we need to make sure we listen to the voice of the customer and solve their problem rather than do what we think should be done. And I'm guilty of that in my head sometimes as well. But there are other claims to fix things up front other than system engineering.
Yeah, and we've got to point out what the best solution is and why we're doing it.
Yeah.
One person who I realise has not had much chance to speak is we haven't had a chance to speak. I know she was on the panel is David Rowe. David, I know you're looking more from the technology point of view, but is there anything you'd like to add from the discussions you've heard just before I finish off? Sorry.
That's very kind of you, Carl. Thanks. So Derek doesn't get the last word.
Yeah, sorry. I just David hasn't had to say anything.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think I would echo an awful lot of what's been said, and I think one of the things that we said we wanted to do, certainly with Nowhere Rail's challenge statements, was to kind of not make them so much Nowhere Rail challenge statements, but to actually focus on sort of co-developing them a bit more, because they do need to be collaboratively owned, and this sort of whole approach of trying to find ways not to commit yourself to a very sort of fixed endpoint, and allowing yourself the ability to sort of make that change as you go along is so important. And I think this the opportunity. I mean, one of the things that, of course, has really struck me, particularly over recent weeks and months, is that it was interesting. Just Katja and Chris Lambert, with your presentations, you're talking about the sort of potential differences between the sort of a business-focused approach versus a technology-focused approach. And of course, we're in the amazing, bizarre position at the moment where business change is potentially going to race and make it relatively easy, certainly compared to the usual situation we find ourselves in, to actually create that alignment. So it feels to me like 2021 is that golden opportunity to kind of make that change, and it all aligns very well with sort of thinking about our whole industry strategic plan and so on. So there's a great opportunity to kind of bring bring this to bear, and of course it wouldn't be a complete final statement as well without sort of drawing in the importance of getting more socialization and engagement around the rail technical strategy for the industry as well, because essentially those roadmaps that we don't have, well, we do, and create a brilliant sort of set of hooks to hang our challenges on. And certainly we've committed to do that in Network Rail, and look forward to sort of working with colleagues to sort of reframe those.
Thank you, David. Thank you all very much. And that was Katja. Sorry we lost you for a bit there, but I don't know if you want to stay on board, and if we can get a chance for you to finish what you were saying, we'll carry on with
Sure.
that. But I just want to say, can I just say, first of all, I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists and all of our fantastic speakers today. Thank you so much for taking your time for joining us today. I think we all agree it's been a very interesting and fruitful discussion. Diane, I'd like to thank you for starting off the event and opening the event today. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Very good presentation. Likewise, Mike, thanks for your great presentation on experience of systems engineering. And also Arvinder, I think your user stories presentation, very useful, very interesting to see what people will take of that going forward. And thank you also, Greg, thank you so much for coming along to talk about concept operations. It's great to see as well the operators spearheading that as well. Let's hope we can all keep that going. And Chris, Katja, thanks for the presentation on enterprise architecture. Very poignant at the moment, very important at the moment. And let's hope, I think we do need those sort of models to help build the industry going forward. Just let everyone know, like I say, tomorrow we will be continuing the event with it will be different. It won't be a series of lectures. We're going to have an interactive workshop tomorrow on how to develop requirements. Some of you may have seen it previously, but those who haven't, and I would please try and do attend it. It is a very, very worthwhile session that Adam runs, and really just show the importance of getting requirements right and how you should develop them. So anyone who can join us tomorrow, please do. This does formally close today's event, but I will keep the call open till 4:30. Anyone who'd like to stay on, I encourage everyone to please just turn your cameras on if you want to, or put your things on. We can start, we can have networking. If there's anyone who would like to particularly have a little one-to-one conversation with anyone in particular, let me know. I can set up breakout rooms for people if that would be the case. But thank you all so much, and I will keep it open, like I say, for another 20 minutes or so until 4:30 for anyone who'd like to open any networking or raise any questions in the chat. While we see what everyone is doing, I think it's probably I give Katja a chance to say if there's anything she wanted to add to what she got very rudely cut off from. I'm sorry. I'm just glad to know that I'm not the only one who's been having computer issues this afternoon, Katja.
Yeah. My laptop really just crashed as I was mid-talk. So yeah, apologies for that. But I think I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think a lot of the things that I was going to say were already covered. So I think from an architecture point of view, I and we as a consulting company have definitely quite a bit of experience in trying to bring good stuff in, like architecture, but the organization is simply not ready for it. Why do we need all this stuff? And I think from our point of view, what really helps is start small, take an agile approach to this thing. So we have clients where we come in being asked for as bring in some architects. Okay, some architects, and right, so we've adopted TOGAF. Okay, that's great. So what have you done? How have you done it? Oh, well, we've got these templates. So I think from our point of view, just because you're adopting a best practice framework doesn't mean you kind of doing what you're supposed to be doing. So I think it takes a lot of just understanding and abstracting. I think someone said that, I forgot who it was, probably Mike. Yeah, abstraction. I really enjoyed your presentation. A lot of things rang true. To just be able to have that abstract thinking, I think from our point of view, to educate our clients in that way and help them with that abstract thinking, how for project managers, I don't know if there's any project managers on, but they're very prone to see their project deliverables, but to say, take a step back and then really need to understand how your project fits into the big picture, what you're delivering, how that helps not just the program, but the wider business. And not just the benefits you're delivering or the deliverables themselves, but what happens with other stuff in 2-3 years time. So how does that fit in? And then I think just that understanding that really helps. Just seeing why is there dependency on this project? Why do we need to deliver this at this point in time? To just get their buy-in, to really say, yeah, we're on board with this. This is what we're doing. And yeah, I think from our point of view, that is one thing that we really find every single time almost. And where you see enterprise architecture or systems engineering, you think, oh, it's all this techie stuff, this modeling stuff. It isn't, 4 days a week, I'm just talking. I'm just talking. And then on Friday afternoon, I sit down and draw some things. And I think that is another, key thing for us as architects. Really talk to everyone and make sure that we really understand them and not just, talk to get information from the words themselves, but really understand them, understand their point of view. And there can be a user that uses a system or is part of business process or does something. So why can they not do what they want to do? Or what makes their life difficult? What gets them frustrated? And at the same time going to senior business leaders and everyone in between and see, so from your point of view, what's the problem? What are you struggling with? And then, it's our job to put this in pictures. So to actually then go out and talk to more people that then help solve this. Okay, right, this is the problem. Here we are. So I think that's really what I wanted to say.
Thanks,
Long-winded answer from an architect as usual.
Yeah, the eternal question. I know one thing we didn't touch on here, which I did think about, but didn't include in the program, which I'll explain in a minute, is the eternal question, the relationship between systems engineering and project management. And the reason I didn't include it was I realized that was because, let's face it, as Mike has just showed, there's a whole book on the subject that's been written by that. I've got that book, and I would say, Mike, could you put the details of it in the chat for everyone, because it's very good. Put the name and everything. You're on mute at the moment, Mike. But there's also about 300 hundreds of different papers on the subject, and I realised I can probably do a whole separate event on that at some point so that will probably be a discussion another time. But I think it's something, if anyone wants to have a chat about it, it is interesting about how the big question for me, I think, in railways is when we start talking about project management and systems engineering is we have to talk about scalability, because for very large projects, you obviously are going to have some dedicated project management in terms of what we define it as the industry, which is very much the commercial and time management of delivery. And then obviously, how do you then have a very purely technical systems engineer working with you on smaller projects? There's always the question is, do you need a dedicated project manager, or do you have one of the engineers taking it on board? And in that case, who's best qualified to take it? And I'll let you jump in at that point, mate, because I know you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, it's something, I've worked on a day-to-day basis, and yes, there are always challenges. Every challenge is different, but it needs to be integral. We talk about the PM function being separate from the systems engineering function, but ultimately we're there to deliver a solution. So without that working together and pulling in the same direction, we're going to start off on, for want of a better word, on a bad foot. So we really need early buy-in, and as I touched on in my presentation, that the beauty of the systems engineering approach is that very early on you can develop that minimum viable product. This is a technical solution. You can understand what we need to deliver. It doesn't need to be a big bang approach, and typically we'll deliver systems because they appear to fit the bill. But again, and there's a point we keep touching on throughout the talk, is what is what do we actually need? Do we need all this additional functionality? Do we need it straight away? And so sorts of questions that really need to be asked, but involving having an upfront systems engineering approach and buy-in is key, I think, to getting this working as delivering a technical program, really.
Absolutely. Yes, thanks. Yeah, that's really good. Mike, sorry, you've got your hand up there as well, I see.
Yeah, just quickly on that, the Integrating Project Management Systems Engineering, it's PMI and Incosi sponsored this book, which has a lot of work together. But to talk a bit about a story over time, I worked with Edwin Swittenbach, Vendir's boss there, back in MOD with DE&S on the system-to-system approach, which was about integrating within MOD systems engineering and project management based on APM together with common processes and going forward as a way of doing business. Now, since then, because that we worked at Atkins, that's all about what Atkins does, right? Put those things together. However, in practice, depending on what domain you are, it either doesn't quite gel together or it's kind of separate. So Rail has been on that path too, I believe. And now GRIP had more project management focus, but systems engineering was kind of overlaid on it. But now through Derek's system integration for delivery, that really, I think, blends those things in probably a lot better than maybe things had in the past. But they have to work together, and it all comes out in the integration. Because if it's not quite aligned, it's not going to integrate, or it's going to integrate with great difficulty and great effort and cost.
Yeah, I'll add two things to that, Mike. First of all, just a shameless plug. Derek's going to be talking about the system integration program on Wednesday. So anyone who's on who'd like to hear more about what Mike's talking about there, please do attend and how that's going to relate to PACE. It's probably also worth mentioning that, and I was told this recently, that when GRIP was first developed, its aim was to try and integrate systems engineering with day-to-day delivery. But unfortunately, I think it got diluted. It lost that over time and got diluted somewhat. And so it's interesting. And PACE, I think we all agree, is a much more flexible model, which is good. But I think it puts a greater emphasis on the project management than the systems engineering again, I think. Sorry, Imtithal, over to you, sorry.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think the GRIP and even London Underground Pathway was including some of the element of system engineering. The challenges, I guess, sometimes is the system engineering, and I think we have to all kind of appreciate that or keep it in mind. I think maybe Richard raised that question, is fundamentally system engineering is normally accused of not delivering as fast. So then the project management or the organization tries to move things quicker because of it's not meeting that timeline. But if you do system integration as a delivery, that's a different perspective, because you're ultimately even hitting your delivery of your system product or system development product or system engineering product and fitting in with an overall program. Not everyone has the luxury of developing system engineering or enterprise architecture within kind of like R&D or whatever, and then have it ready and use it. Often you are faced with a delivery program that has a number of timeline and timescales, and often that system engineering tend to be a bit lagging. So in the past, in order for us to overcome this, and we have managed to successfully overcome this, is actually by applying this system integration as part of delivery, including it as part of your work breakdown structure, and becomes your integrated program that project management can use it. And again, it comes down to the language. When you're talking to different people, you have to talk to them according to the language. You talk to procurement, you have to talk about cost benefit analysis, you have to talk about CapEx, you have to talk about OpEx. You talk to PM, you need to be appreciative of that kind of delivery timescale and the pressure of hitting certain gates or whatever it is, and how do we fit in system integration at the right time, the deliverable of system integration. So there's a little bit of work to do, I guess, from both sides, but it's all about collaboration and working together and feeding that whole system picture.
Excellent. Yeah, very good point. Thank you, Emethal. Yeah. Anyone want to raise anything else while we've still got the session open, or anyone want to ask the panel anything? Any discussions? Oh, Arvinder, you're straight in there, mate.
Apologies, Carl, in advance. I may go slightly off topic, but it was touched on in Greg's presentation about test, and unfortunately we can't go talking about design without even considering test.
Good point.
They go hand in hand. Again, experience has shown we're very keen on testing the solution as opposed to testing the requirement. And I think is a key point. It's a key mistake made in many sectors, and typically why we see systems going out into live service and only then seeing these problems and not occurring at these different test stages. It's definitely a key consideration. Hence the points I raised, and I do apologise in agenda slightly topic, but or to a tangent.
Please don't apologise, I don't think it is off topic. I'll also relate to what's going on later in the week. The importance of testing and requirements will be covered in the workshop tomorrow. First of all, that is one of the key things that Adam will be talking about. Also, the reason that we have a slightly different day again on Thursday, where we're going to be looking at some demonstrations of modelling and synthetic environments, is for that very reason as you're talking about, because how do we test these requirements and how do we do that testing as much as possible before we actually get onto the operational railway? And you've raised a very good point there that yes, I think historically we've not tested the requirements, and we also, I don't think we've done a lot of, as an industry, sequential, what you might call sequential testing or phase testing as we're going through the development.
Yeah, through the V model. It's
exactly.
The V model's there to incrementally and rigorously test a solution, not a one-time test. So it's there to de-risk as we go along.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I don't know if anyone's. I don't know if we've got any assurance engineers or anything. That's one thing that's interesting. I've always thought in the railway industry is I'm not sure the assurance models we use at the moment tend to be very compatible with that. Our assurance models tend to be quite geared towards big bang and what we're trying to ultimately, because I think they're based around assuring the end product rather than the phase introduction. We don't see it, but again, it's interesting. Andrew Simmons is going to be talking about this on Wednesday and how we build up assurance rather than trying to look at just tacking assurance on the end. So again, it's actually interesting, Arvin, you've been off topic, but it's actually quite relevant to a lot of things we're speaking on later in the week as well. So thank you very much for raising it. Mike, sorry, you want to come in there?
Yeah, quick on that. Because I'm working on RBLS, radio-based limited supervision with Network Rail. One of the key standards is BSEN 50126. And 50126 deliberately brings in safety and RAM into a life cycle management scheme, which goes through these various phases. And that touches more on that kind of approach where it's less stovepipe and less, do it in blocks, but has more of a holistic approach to it. And I believe that's becoming more of the railway standard. So I think that with the other disciplines falling into play, where you can deal with more agile, you can deal with, more top-down approaches that are needed, you can make it fit to what it needs to do, but you do need to follow these life cycles and do it in integrated ways.
Okay, thank you very much. Imtithal, I've just noticed we seem to have lost Helen. Was she on the call, Mike? I didn't see her on. Sorry, earlier. I do apologise if she was on earlier. I didn't ask her any question. I'll send her an email.
She was earlier, and I think she might have had
I think she's left, Carl.
Yeah, I've just seen she's left, but I didn't notice her on earlier. I do apologise. I would have mentioned her on sooner. Imtithal, sorry, you've got a question there. Sorry as well.
Yeah, no, it was just kind of like it's not actually assurance. Normally is kind of done incremental to some extent, but obviously we haven't succeeded to kind of apply it effectively purely because testing requirements is quite challenging. I fully agree with you, Arvinder. It's how we're building that, and this is part of the work that we're currently doing anyway, as part of Target 190, and also through the work we're doing with our European partner in working in developing model-based system engineering, where you start building this aspect of it and use the simulation environment more effectively so that we reduce our actual on-site testing. So all of these are kind of, and I'm sure Andrew is gonna provide an update and everything else. But I don't think it's true that it was only intended to be done at the end of the life cycle or whatever. There has been an attempt to introduce assurance and as early as possible. It's just, I guess, sometimes it becomes quite complex, and it's difficult sometimes to test requirements, in particular if they're not written as well as they should have been.
Yeah. Again, very much why I'm wanting to run this workshop tomorrow as well, for this reason. The requirements are another area where we need is key, and get the requirements right. That's very key of the part of the job done, I think. Sorry, anyone else like to raise anything while we've got the session open? Oh, Karen, sorry, Karen there.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Karen. Hello.
Hi. So I have, sorry, I haven't been a part of the whole webinar, but one thing that I was thinking about when you're talking about end users, and I work across many different sectors around innovation. And so I wonder if there's been focused areas to speak with people who are in, for instance, biopharma, who are involved, just really speak with end users who are working within different sectors to see if you can get more nuanced needs when you're addressing whole systems innovation and problem solving. So because one sector of needs might be a little bit different than another sector's needs. Just a thought. And I wonder if anybody has any thoughts about that. So somebody was mentioning 14 or 15-year-olds, as a user group, which is, I work with youth, so that's important. But I also work with many different stakeholders. And so I got interested in transportation because of my own need for it in Boston, for instance. And so I was sort of studying myself using it. And then I ended up working on a bus rapid transit demonstration project in Boston, working with riders on the ground level to inform a larger policy project. But in any case, just wondering if anybody has any thoughts about that.
Good question. Probably Greg, Diane, would either of you like to mention that, about what your view is about what input you could get from other sectors' users?
Oh, a good question. And I think it's sort of something that we all do in our dreams, and then we realise it's all really complicated.
Yeah.
And then we go for, a majority or a middle ground, and then you miss a lot of users, and you end up with a suboptimal solution. And I think that was the other thing that I was sort of thinking about, having been an operator most of my career, is that quite often we leave the user requirements and the testing too late in the process, and we don't think through how we're going to resource that. So if you look at simple things like, well, not simple things, but things like testing fleet, introducing fleet, quite often you have to recruit double the number of drivers that you would normally have on your payroll. That's a cost. So if we're going to start pushing that through everything that we do through a systems perspective, then that's got the potential to be kind of quite a heavy a heavy kind of cost on the industry. And if you're not planning that in at the beginning as part of your overall kind of cost base, that's quite often while the users will go, well, I can't do that. I can't engage with you there because I don't have the resources, because it's more important for me to go and check that set of points today, rather than be involved in a big project. So I think some of that thinking up front is really, really important, and absolutely fundamental as part of the planning process. And that's where it might work in terms of looking at experiences from other industries. I also think doing digital twinning can also help determine and test kind of user requirements as well. And we probably don't do enough of that.
Yeah.
So
and of course, another shameless plug. Of course, two of your staff are going to be talking about digital twin on Thursday, of course. So
they will be, and I'm sure they'll be brilliant.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure as well. Thank you, Diane. Greg, sorry, you've got your hand up as well, and then I'll come to you, Mike. Sorry.
Thanks, Carl. Just to add to what Diane has said, I think one must be careful when looking at other industries to look for an approach as opposed to a solution. Let's look at what others do, and by all means take the approach and use that as best we can to satisfy our own problem solving requirements, but don't necessarily take someone else's solution, because the context is different, the requirements are different. the legislation, the standards are different. So I think that's where we, I said the industry typically falls down, where people, and I say this as someone who's come from another industry into the railway, just because it worked for me in uniform 10 years ago, that doesn't mean it's going to work now in maintaining a fleet of suburban trains, for example. So that distinction between approach and solution, I think, is important when it comes to looking at other fields.
Thank you, Greg. Mike, sorry, is there something you just want to add to that? Thank you very much, Greg. That was very
Yes, I do. Approach, and like I had in my diagram, the approach that has been used, and I've seen it used in defense and other places, is that if you divide your future, you have a migration strategy, you have a to be. If you divide that future into a 3 to 5 year near-term future, a medium-term future, which might be 5 to 7 or 5 to 8 years out, and your long-term future, which is beyond that, maybe up to 15 years. In each of those sectors, the world's going to look slightly different, and you're going to have different users at different ages. So try to imagine the world in each of those groups and start planning what you think it might be and start including some of those people. So in the military sense, you're dealing with, again, people are going to be commanders 10 years from now who are much younger. And those are going to be at different ways of development that you start seeing now as teenagers and below. So you have that. But if you're doing that for trains, how are we going to travel differently in the near term, medium term, and long term? How is that going to change the patterns and the way we work? More digitalization, people are using different devices, people are traveling in different ways because they're not driving their car, they're doing something else. Or they're being virtual, they're not traveling at all, or want to travel only a certain way. So if you break the future up into 3 different groups, that can help with the kind of engagement maybe you might need. You can start planning it out.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I think at that point, I'll close the call off and everything. Thank you all for... sorry, Karen, is there anything... sorry, I should have said come back to you first, Karen. Thank you very much for your question. I hope that's given some way to answering it or given a view.
Yeah, I would love to talk more about this. I think it would be a fabulous project, actually.
Oh, okay. If you want to drop us a line, Karen, and if we can see what we can do, just let me know and we'll see what we can and see if we can facilitate anything. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And I will close the call. Again, can I thank all our fabulous speakers and presenters today? Give you all a virtual round of applause. And thank you all for coming. And I hope to see you all of you the rest of the week. And everyone take care and stay safe. And thank you all again. Look forward. And any questions, just drop me a line. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Carl.
Bye now.
Bye. Bye. Thank you. Bye.